There is a photograph, black and white, dated 1891. In it, a tower rises against the flat horizon of the American Midwest, somewhere between Kansas and Nebraska. The structure is elegant, impossibly so for its supposed era. Metal lattice work spiraling upward, crowned by what appears to be a spherical apparatus wrapped in coiled wire. The official caption reads simply, "Agricultural Water Tower, location unknown." But something about the image refuses to settle in the mind. The proportions are wrong. The design is too precise, and the spherical crown at the top bears no resemblance to any water storage system ever documented in 19th century America. This is where the story begins. Not with answers, but with questions that multiply the longer one looks. The United States of America, in the decades following the Civil War, underwent what historians call the most rapid industrialization in human history. Railroads spread like iron veins across the continent. Cities rose from prairie dust. And electricity, that mysterious force that would define the 20th century, began its slow conquest of darkness. But the official narrative of this transformation is clean, too clean. It tells us that Thomas Edison invented the practical incandescent bulb in 1879. That Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse battled Edison in the War of Currents, that power stations were built one by one, and the nation was gradually illuminated through human ingenuity and industrial progress. What the narrative does not explain are the towers. Scattered across the American landscape in photographs from the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, stand structures that defy the technological timeline we have been taught. They appear in the backgrounds of World's Fair photographs. They stand sentinel over small towns that supposedly had no electrical infrastructure. They rise from courthouse lawns and city centers in places where power lines would not arrive for another 30 years. And then, without explanation, they vanish. The researcher who first drew attention to these anomalies was a retired electrical engineer named Harold Whitmore. In 2014, Whitmore began cataloguing architectural photographs from the Gilded Age, initially as a hobby. What he found disturbed him enough to spend the remaining years of his life in obsessive documentation. "The towers are everywhere," Whitmore wrote in his unpublished manuscript. "Once you start looking, you cannot stop seeing them. They are in photographs of courthouses, train stations, public squares, and fairgrounds. They share common features, metallic construction, geometric precision, and that distinctive spherical or domed apparatus at the apex. And yet, in every official record I have examined, they are either unlabeled, mislabeled, or entirely absent from the written documentation." Worse, Whitmore identified over 300 such structures in photographs spanning from 1865 to 1915. He mapped their locations across the continental United States and discovered something that would haunt him until his death in 2019. The towers formed a grid. Not a random scattering, but a precise geometric network, with each tower positioned at calculated intervals from its neighbors. The implications were staggering. If these structures were merely decorative or served mundane purposes like water storage or weather observation, why would they be arranged in such mathematical precision? And if they served some other purpose, some function that required geometric positioning, what could that function possibly be? The answer, Whitmore believed, lay in the very design of the towers themselves. Each structure he documented shared certain characteristics. The base was typically stone or brick, solid and ancient in appearance, often integrated into older buildings that predated the towers themselves. The shaft was metal, usually iron or steel, constructed with the same lattice technique that would later define structures like the Eiffel Tower. And the crown, always the crown, that mysterious spherical apparatus wrapped in what appeared to be copper coiling. To an electrical engineer, the design was unmistakable. These were not water towers. They were not weather stations. They were, in every technical sense, resonant frequency transmitters. The principle is simple, though its implications are profound. When electrical current passes through a coiled conductor, it generates an electromagnetic field. If the coil is designed with precise dimensions, tuned to specific frequencies, that field can resonate with other coils at a distance. Energy can be transferred through the air itself, without wires, without cables, without any visible connection. This technology, we are told, was pioneered by Nikola Tesla in the 1890s. His famous Wardenclyffe Tower, constructed on Long Island between 1901 and 1902, was designed to transmit electrical power wirelessly across vast distances. The project was never completed. Funding was withdrawn. The tower was demolished in 1917. But if Whitmore was correct, if the towers in those old photographs were what they appeared to be, then Tesla did not invent wireless power transmission. He rediscovered it. And the system he sought to build already existed, stretching across the American continent, before it was systematically dismantled and erased from memory. The question that remains, the question that led Whitmore into the archives and kept him there until his death, is not whether these towers existed. The photographic evidence is overwhelming. The question is why they were removed, why the records were altered, why the very existence of this technology was buried so completely that even mentioning it sounds like fantasy. In the small town of Emporia, Kansas, there is a courthouse built in 1882. The original architectural plans, stored in the Lyon County Historical Society, show a building with a central dome and 4 corner spires. But photographs from the 1880s reveal something else entirely. A 5th structure rising from behind the courthouse, a metal tower crowned with the distinctive spherical apparatus that Whitmore documented across the nation. The tower does not appear in any official records. The courthouse history makes no mention of it, and by 1910 the tower is simply gone, as if it had never existed. This pattern repeats across hundreds of locations. Towers appear in photographs, solid and real, casting shadows and reflecting light. Then they disappear, leaving no trace in the written record, no explanation for their removal, no acknowledgement that they ever stood at all. Something was taken from us, something was hidden, and the silence that surrounds these structures is not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of deliberate forgetting. The deeper we dig, the more questions emerge. The more photographs we examine, the more towers we find. And with each discovery, the shape of a lost system begins to emerge from the shadows of suppressed history. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not speculation. This is an investigation into physical evidence that refuses to disappear, no matter how thoroughly it has been erased from the official record. The towers were real. The technology was real, and somewhere, beneath the layers of revised history and manufactured amnesia, the truth is waiting to be remembered. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If stories that reveal what history tried to hide resonate with you, if you believe that truth deserves witnesses, then join us. Subscribe now, because what comes next will change how you see the world you thought you knew. St. Louis, Missouri. The year is 1904. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition has transformed the city into a wonderland of architectural splendor. Over 20 million visitors will pass through its gates during the 7 months of its operation. Photographs from the fair show a breathtaking landscape of palaces, colonnades, and ceremonial halls, their white facades gleaming in the summer sun. But in the margins of these photographs, in the spaces between the celebrated structures, something else stands. Metal towers, dozens of them, rising above the temporary exhibition halls with their distinctive spherical crowns. Official records list them as ornamental lighting standards or flagpole supports. Yet when researchers examine the electrical infrastructure of the 1904 fair, something strange emerges. The exposition was powered by a central generating station, its electricity distributed through underground cables to the various buildings and attractions. The system is well documented. The layouts are preserved, and the metal towers, those supposedly ornamental structures, are not connected to this system in any surviving schematic. They stand apart, isolated, yet in every photograph where they appear, the surrounding area is illuminated. The light soft and even, without the harsh shadows that characterized early electrical lighting. This is the contradiction that haunts the historical record. A lighting system that does not connect to the power source, towers that serve no official purpose, and illumination that cannot be explained by the technology we are told existed at the time. The 1904 exposition was not unique. Similar anomalies appear in photographs from the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, and the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. Each fair featured dozens of unexplained towers. Each fair was illuminated in ways that challenged the official history of electrical development. And after each fair, the towers were dismantled, the structures demolished, and the photographs carefully preserved in archives where they would remain largely unexamined for over a century. The man who oversaw the electrical systems at the 1893 Chicago Fair was named George Westinghouse. Working with Nikola Tesla, Westinghouse had won the contract to illuminate the exposition using alternating current, defeating Thomas Edison's direct current system in what became known as the Battle of the Currents. History celebrates this moment as a triumph of innovation. Tesla and Westinghouse proved that AC power could be transmitted efficiently over long distances, laying the foundation for the modern electrical grid. But Tesla's private correspondence from this period tells a different story. In letters to his friend and financier, Robert Underwood Johnson, Tesla wrote repeatedly of his frustration with the exposition's electrical system. "We have been forced to replicate what already existed," Tesla wrote in March 1893. "The infrastructure was in place. We merely connected to it. But they will not allow me to acknowledge what I have found." Who are they? What infrastructure was already in place? Tesla's letters do not elaborate, but the frustration is palpable, the sense of constraint unmistakable. Tesla would spend the next decade pursuing wireless power transmission, a technology he insisted was not only possible, but had already been achieved. His Wardenclyffe project was the culmination of this obsession, a tower designed to broadcast electrical energy across the Atlantic without wires. The project failed, or rather, it was killed. J.P. Morgan, Tesla's primary financier, withdrew funding in 1904 when he realized that wireless power could not be metered. "If anyone can draw on the power," Morgan reportedly said, "where do we put the meter?" The implications of this statement have been discussed endlessly in the century since. But perhaps the more interesting question is not why Morgan withdrew his support, but why he believed Tesla's claims in the first place. Morgan was not a man who invested in fantasies. He was a banker, ruthless and precise, who built his fortune on calculated risk. If Morgan believed that wireless power transmission was possible, it was because he had seen evidence that it worked. The towers that appear in photographs from this era, the hundreds of structures that Whitmore documented before his death, may provide that evidence, not as relics of 19th century experimentation, but as remnants of a much older system, a network that predated the Industrial Revolution and was systematically dismantled as the new paradigm of metered wired electricity took hold. Consider the geography. Whitmore's map of tower locations reveals a pattern that cannot be coincidental. The structures cluster along ancient waterways, near geological formations rich in quartz and granite, at intersections of what the indigenous peoples of North America called spirit paths. The towers are not randomly distributed. They are positioned with the same precision that characterizes sacred sites around the world. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, near the site that would later become Mount Rushmore, early photographs show a tower rising from a granite outcropping. The structure is massive, at least 200 feet tall, with a metal framework supporting multiple spherical apparatus at various heights. This photograph was taken in 1888. The Black Hills had been seized from the Lakota people only 12 years earlier. The region was still largely wilderness, with no significant electrical infrastructure for hundreds of miles. Yet there stands the tower, its presence unexplained, its purpose unrecorded. The Lakota called this place the Six Grandfathers, a site of profound spiritual significance. Their oral traditions speak of a time when the hills sang with the voice of the thunder beings, when light would dance across the peaks without fire or storm. These descriptions, dismissed for decades as primitive mythology, take on new meaning when viewed alongside the photographic evidence. What if the Lakota were not speaking metaphorically? What if they were describing, in the only language they had, a technology they witnessed but could not explain? The pattern repeats across the continent. Indigenous accounts of sky fire and singing stones align with the locations of documented towers. Ancient earthworks, dismissed as ceremonial structures, share the geometric proportions of resonant frequency systems. And the places where these traditions were strongest are precisely the places where the towers were most thoroughly removed, the evidence most completely destroyed. This is not to suggest that indigenous peoples built the towers. The evidence suggests something far stranger, that the towers were ancient when the first humans arrived in North America, that they were maintained and repurposed across millennia, and that their final destruction coincided with the establishment of the modern electrical grid. The architects of this destruction left few traces of their work, but they could not erase everything. They could not reach every archive, destroy every photograph, silence every witness. In the basement of the Boston Public Library, there is a collection of papers donated by an anonymous benefactor in 1923. The collection includes technical drawings, correspondence, and accounting records from a company called American Resonance Technologies, Incorporated. The company was founded in 1876 and dissolved in 1901. During its 25 years of operation, it employed over 2,000 workers across 17 states. Its stated purpose was the maintenance and optimization of atmospheric electrical systems for industrial and municipal applications. What systems? There is no record of American Resonance Technologies ever installing new equipment. All of their documented work involved maintenance of existing structures that do not appear in any other historical record. The company's correspondence reveals a hierarchy of secrecy. Workers were forbidden from discussing their assignments. Equipment was transported in unmarked vehicles, and each maintenance visit was followed by a detailed report sent to an address in New York City that no longer exists. When the company dissolved in 1901, its assets were purchased by a consortium that included J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie, the three most powerful industrialists in American history. Within a decade, the towers they had maintained began disappearing from the landscape. The silence that followed was not accidental. It was purchased, it was engineered, and it has persisted for over a century. But silence, like all things, eventually breaks. There is a sound that haunts certain places in America. It is not a sound that can be recorded or measured with conventional instruments. It exists at the edge of perception, a low hum that seems to rise from the earth itself, felt more than heard. The Lakota called it the heartbeat of the grandfathers. The Hopi described it as the song of the sleeping ones. Spanish missionaries in California wrote of the devil's murmur, that emanated from certain hills at sunset. And settlers moving west in the 19th century reported areas where their horses would refuse to walk, where compass needles spun without direction, where the very air seemed to vibrate with invisible presence. These accounts were dismissed as superstition, the natural fears of people encountering an unfamiliar landscape. But the locations they describe, when mapped against Harold Whitmore's research, correspond almost perfectly with the sites of documented towers. The sound is not supernatural, it is not imaginary. It is the residual frequency of a system that once operated across this continent, a harmonic echo that persists even though the transmitters have been destroyed. Understanding this requires a brief excursion into physics, though the concepts involved are far simpler than the establishment would have us believe. Every physical object has a resonant frequency, a rate of vibration at which it naturally oscillates when energy is applied. Strike a tuning fork, and it produces a specific tone. That tone is its resonant frequency. If you place a second tuning fork nearby, tuned to the same frequency, it will begin to vibrate in sympathy, even though you never touched it directly. This principle, called sympathetic resonance, is the foundation of wireless energy transfer. If you can generate a strong enough oscillating field at a specific frequency, any object tuned to that frequency within range will absorb the energy and begin to resonate in turn. The towers that Whitmore documented were, in their design, exactly the kind of structures that could generate such fields. Their spherical crowns, wrapped in copper coiling, were resonant cavities. Their metal frameworks were antennas, and their positioning, at calculated intervals across the landscape, created a network of overlapping fields that could transfer energy across vast distances without wires. This is not speculation. This is engineering. The mathematics have been understood since the work of James Clerk Maxwell in the 1860s. The practical applications were demonstrated by Tesla before the turn of the 20th century. And the evidence suggests that someone, long before Maxwell or Tesla, had already built a working system. The question is not whether the technology is possible. The question is who built it and why it was destroyed. In the archive of the New York Historical Society, there is a document that should not exist. It is a land survey from 1803, part of the preparations for the Louisiana Purchase. The survey covers a vast territory, from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, and includes detailed notations about terrain, water sources, and existing structures. Among these notations are references to the towers of the old ones. The surveyor, a man named Meriwether Lewis, describes encountering dozens of these structures during his preliminary explorations. He notes their positions with care, measures their dimensions, and speculates about their purpose. These edifices, Lewis wrote, appear to be of great antiquity, though constructed with materials and techniques that suggest a civilization of considerable advancement. The natives regard them with reverence and fear, speaking of lights that once danced between them in the old times, before the long silence fell. Lewis's full survey was never published. The expedition that bears his name, conducted with William Clark from 1804 to 1806, makes no mention of the towers in its official report. And by 1809, Meriwether Lewis was dead, under circumstances that remain controversial to this day. The official verdict was suicide, but those who knew Lewis insisted that he was murdered, that he had discovered something during his western explorations that powerful interests wanted buried. We will never know what Lewis found in those western territories, but we can trace the pattern of destruction that followed. Within 50 years of his death, systematic efforts were underway to dismantle the tower network across North America. By the time of the Civil War, most of the structures east of the Mississippi had been removed. By 1900, the destruction was nearly complete. The few towers that survived did so by accident or oversight in remote locations far from the centers of power, and even these remnants were eventually targeted. In 1943, the United States government conducted a classified operation in the Nevada desert. The operation's official purpose was geological survey, but the equipment deployed included electromagnetic sensors, resonance detectors, and teams of electrical engineers with security clearances that exceeded their stated roles. The operation's target was a structure that local ranchers called the Singing Tower, a metal framework rising from the desert floor near what would later become the Nevada test site. The tower had stood in that location for as long as anyone could remember. No one knew who built it. No one knew when it arrived. The government team dismantled the tower in a single night, transporting the components to an undisclosed location. The ranchers who witnessed the operation were told that the structure was a hazard to aviation. They were offered compensation for their silence. Most accepted. Those who refused found their grazing rights revoked, their water access restricted, and their livelihoods slowly strangled until they had no choice but to sell their land and leave. The Nevada test site would conduct its first nuclear detonation 2 years later, in July 1945. The location chosen for that test was less than 5 miles from where the Singing Tower had stood. Is this coincidence? Perhaps. But the pattern of coincidences becomes, at a certain point, a pattern of connections. The towers were removed from places that later became centers of military and industrial power. They were dismantled before events that would reshape the landscape of America. And always, always, the silence followed. There is a phrase that has stayed with me through months of research, a phrase that seems to capture the essence of what was done to this system and to our memory of it. I share it now not as instruction, but as invitation. If these words resonate with you, if they speak to something you have felt but could not name, then speak them aloud. Leave them in the comments below. Let them become a chorus of remembrance. The silence was never natural. We are learning to hear again. Say it. Write it. Let it become a testimony, because the act of remembering is, in itself, a form of resistance. Beneath the streets of every major American city lies a world that most people never see. Miles of tunnels, chambers, and passages, some mapped and maintained, others sealed and forgotten. These subterranean networks are explained as utility corridors, steam tunnels, or abandoned subway lines. But in certain cities, the tunnels predate the utilities they supposedly contain. They predate the cities themselves. In Chicago, during the excavation for the new transit line in 1913, workers broke through the wall of what they believed was a natural cavern. What they found on the other side was not stone, but finished masonry, a tunnel extending into darkness with walls of dressed limestone, and a vaulted ceiling that showed no signs of the soot and debris that characterized 19th century construction. The foreman, a man named Patrick O'Brien, wrote in his personal diary that the tunnel appeared to be of extreme age, yet preserved as though completed yesterday. He described copper fixtures embedded in the walls, fixtures that hummed faintly when touched. He described markings on the floor that seemed to indicate direction and distance. And he described, at the end of the accessible section, a chamber containing a massive stone pedestal upon which sat an apparatus of metal and crystal that none among us could identify. O'Brien's diary was discovered by his descendants in 1987 and donated to a local historical society. Its contents were never published. The section of tunnel he described was sealed within days of its discovery, and the transit line was rerouted at considerable expense. Similar discoveries have been made in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and dozens of smaller cities across the United States. In each case, the tunnels are older than the cities above them. In each case, they contain evidence of electrical systems that predate the supposed invention of electricity. And in each case, they are quickly sealed, their existence denied, their discoverers silenced. The pattern suggests a system of enormous scope, a network of underground channels connecting the tower sites that Whitmore documented on the surface. If the towers were transmitters, broadcasting energy across the landscape, the tunnels may have been the grounding system, the return path that completed the circuit. This hypothesis gains support from the geological surveys that accompanied many of these discoveries. The tunnels are not randomly placed. They follow fault lines, aquifers, and mineral deposits with uncanny precision. They are positioned to maximize contact with conductive geological formations, to tap into the natural electrical potential of the Earth itself. The technology is called telluric energy, and it was known to Tesla. His Colorado Springs experiments in 1899 demonstrated that the Earth itself could serve as a conductor, that electrical current could be passed through the ground with minimal loss over vast distances. Tesla believed he was discovering something new, but the tunnels beneath American cities suggest that this technology was ancient, that someone had understood and exploited telluric currents long before the modern era. Who built these tunnels? The question leads into territory that most historians refuse to enter. In the archives of the Smithsonian Institution, there are reports from 19th-century surveys that describe structures of enormous age across the American interior. Pyramids in the Mississippi Valley, stone chambers in New England, and a network of what the surveyors called the underground temples, tunnels and chambers that extended for miles beneath the prairies. These reports were systematically suppressed, the physical evidence was destroyed or sealed, and the official history of North America became a story of wilderness and primitive peoples, a blank slate upon which European civilization could write its own narrative. But the tunnels remain. Sealed, yes. Hidden, certainly. But they have not been destroyed because they cannot be destroyed. The engineering that created them exceeds anything we can replicate today. In 2017, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar surveyed a site in central Ohio that local traditions identified as the doorway of the ancient ones. What they found beneath the surface was a structure of staggering complexity, a chamber nearly 500 feet in diameter, its walls lined with a material that the radar could not penetrate, its ceiling supported by columns that appeared to be carved from solid quartz. The team was unable to locate an entrance to the chamber. Their permits were revoked before they could conduct further investigation. And the site is now under the jurisdiction of a federal agency that has classified all information about its contents. What is being hidden? What lies beneath the surface of this continent that the authorities do not want us to find? The answers may lie in the few documents that have escaped the net of censorship. In the papers of Benjamin Franklin, preserved at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, there is a letter dated 1752, the year of his famous kite experiment. The letter is addressed to a colleague in London and describes Franklin's discovery of what he calls the apparatus of the ancients. "I have found," Franklin writes, "in the wilderness of Pennsylvania, a structure of metal and stone that appears designed for the collection and distribution of electrical fluid. The natives speak of it with awe, claiming that it once illuminated the forest for miles in every direction. I've examined the apparatus carefully and can confirm that it is constructed upon principles I do not fully understand, though they align in every particular with the theories I have developed regarding the nature of electrical discharge." Franklin's letter was not included in his published correspondence. It was found among his private papers after his death, and its contents were never made public. Did Franklin's famous kite experiment truly discover the electrical nature of lightning, or did it merely confirm what he had already learned from the apparatus of the ancients, a technology that he could not reveal without exposing the existence of a civilization that history was determined to forget? The questions multiply, the evidence accumulates, and the shape of what was lost becomes clearer with each discovery, a system of towers and tunnels spanning the American continent. A technology capable of generating and transmitting electrical energy without wires or fuel. A civilization of unknown age and origin, whose works were systematically dismantled and erased as the modern industrial order took hold. This is not a mystery from the distant past. This is a theft from our present. We are living in an artificial scarcity, burning fossil fuels and building power lines, when the technology for free, unlimited energy existed for millennia before us. The silence is breaking. The truth is emerging. And those who have maintained the deception for generations are beginning to realize that they cannot hold back the tide forever. In a small town in rural Vermont, there lives a woman named Eleanor Blackwood. She is 93 years old, the daughter of a man who spent his career working for American Resonance Technologies, the mysterious company that maintained the tower network before its dissolution in 1901. Eleanor was 12 when her father died in 1943, but she remembers the stories he told, stories that he swore her to secrecy about until the time was right. "My father was a maintenance technician," Eleanor recalls in a rare interview conducted in 2019. "He traveled constantly to places that weren't on any map. He would be gone for weeks at a time, and when he came back, he wouldn't speak of where he had been or what he had done. But in his final years, as his health declined and the weight of secrecy became unbearable, Eleanor's father began to talk. He told me about the towers," Eleanor says, "how they were ancient, older than any building in America, older than the pyramids of Egypt, how they had been found by the first European explorers, standing in the wilderness, humming with energy that no one could explain, how they had been studied and mapped and maintained in secret for centuries, even as the land was settled and the official history was written." Her father described a network that once covered not just North America, but the entire planet. Towers standing on every continent, connected by underground channels, powered by the electrical potential of the Earth itself. A system designed to provide free energy to anyone who needed it, a gift from a civilization that had mastered forces we are only beginning to understand. "But the system was failing," Eleanor continues. "By the time my father joined the company, only a fraction of the towers were still operational. The knowledge of how to repair them had been lost. All they could do was maintain what remained and study what they didn't understand." The dissolution of American Resonance Technologies in 1901 was not a business decision, according to Eleanor's father. It was a capitulation. The new industrialists, Morgan and Rockefeller and Carnegie, had realized that the tower system could not be controlled. Energy that was free could not be metered. Power that was unlimited could not be sold. So they destroyed it, Eleanor says. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. They tore down the towers and sealed the tunnels and burned the records and told everyone who knew the truth that they would be destroyed if they ever spoke of it. Her father lived in fear for the rest of his life, watching over his shoulder, speaking in whispers even in his own home. He died believing that the secret would die with him. But Eleanor remembered, and now, in the final years of her life, she has chosen to speak. "I don't care anymore," she says. "What can they do to a 93-year-old woman? Kill me? I've lived my life, but the truth hasn't. The truth needs to be heard." Eleanor is not alone. Across the country, in nursing homes and retirement communities, the children and grandchildren of those who worked on the tower system are beginning to share what they know. Their stories vary in detail, but converge on the same central truth. The technology existed, it worked, and it was deliberately destroyed. In Oklahoma, a retired geologist named Marcus Hightower describes his grandfather's work mapping the underground channels beneath the Great Plains. He said they were channels for energy, not water. That they connected the towers like veins connect organs in a body. He spent 30 years mapping them, and when he retired, all his maps were confiscated. They gave him a pension and a warning, and he never spoke of it publicly again. In Massachusetts, a former archivist named Patricia Stein recalls documents she processed in the 1970s before they were destroyed. Financial records from the late 1800s showing payments to workers who maintained something called the resonance infrastructure. Thousands of pages, millions of dollars, all for a system that wasn't supposed to exist. I was told to process them for destruction, but I read them first. I read enough to know that everything we've been taught about the history of electricity is a lie. These witnesses are dying. Their numbers dwindle with each passing year. Soon the living memory of the tower system will be gone, and only the physical evidence will remain. But the physical evidence is compelling. In 2021, a team of independent researchers conducted a survey of sites identified in Whitmore's original research. At 37 locations, they found physical remnants consistent with the towers described in historical photographs, foundation stones, metal fragments, and soil composition that suggested long-term electromagnetic activity. At 12 of these sites, they detected anomalous readings that modern science cannot easily explain. Electromagnetic fields stronger than the surrounding area. Temperature differentials that do not correlate with weather or geology. And at 3 sites, the distinctive low-frequency hum that witnesses have reported for centuries. The towers are gone, but their footprints remain. The transmitters have been dismantled, but the earth itself remembers what once stood there. In the Black Hills, where the Lakota once heard the voice of the thunder beings, the soil still vibrates at frequencies that fall outside normal parameters. In the Nevada desert, where the government dismantled the Singing Tower in 1943, the ground is still warm to the touch, decades after the last component was removed. Something was here, something powerful, something that the authorities have spent over a century trying to make us forget. But forgetting is not the same as erasure. The evidence persists, the witnesses speak, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising to the surface. The question now is not whether the tower system existed. The evidence has surpassed the point of plausible denial. The question is what we will do with this knowledge. How we will rise to confront a lie that has shaped our entire understanding of progress and power. The witnesses have shown us the way. They have carried the truth through decades of silence, waiting for a generation willing to listen. Their courage demands that we honor their sacrifice by refusing to look away from what they have revealed. Eleanor Blackwood, in her final words to the interviewer, said something that has stayed with me through every hour of this research. The towers were not just technology, they were a promise that energy could be free, that abundance could be shared, that humanity could live without the chains of artificial scarcity. When they destroyed the towers, they didn't just destroy machines, they destroyed a future we were meant to have. That future is not gone. It is waiting, hidden in the residual frequencies of ancient sites, preserved in the memories of those who knew, encoded in the very fabric of the earth that once carried the current of a lost civilization. And now it is waiting for us to remember. We return to where we began, a photograph, black and white, a tower rising against the flat horizon of the American Midwest, an image that should not exist, depicting technology that we are told was never invented. But now, after everything we have uncovered, the photograph looks different. It is no longer an anomaly to be explained away. It is a window into a world that was taken from us, a glimpse of the future that should have been our present. The tower in that photograph stood for perhaps 50 years before it was dismantled. But the system it belonged to had existed for millennia, across continents and civilizations, through rises and falls that history has forgotten. The network endured. It provided energy without cost, power without pollution, abundance without the artificial scarcity that defines our modern existence. And then, in the span of a single generation, it was erased. The men who orchestrated this destruction believed they were securing their power forever. They thought that by controlling energy, they could control humanity. That by destroying the towers, they could ensure that the masses would remain dependent on systems that could be metered, monopolized, and monetized. For over a century, they were right. But they made a mistake. They assumed that technology was the only thing that mattered. They forgot that knowledge, once created, cannot be truly destroyed. It can be hidden, suppressed, scattered across 1,000 archives and memories. But it survives, it waits, and eventually it returns. The evidence we have gathered is not complete. There are gaps in the record, questions that remain unanswered, connections that we can only guess at. But the shape of the truth is visible now, emerging from the silence like a structure rising from morning fog. There was a civilization before ours, a culture that understood forces we are only beginning to rediscover. They built a system that harnessed the electrical potential of the Earth itself, transmitting energy through a network of towers and tunnels that spanned the globe. This system was not primitive, it was not experimental, it was mature, refined, perfected over timescales that dwarf our recorded history. When this civilization fell, whether through catastrophe or transcendence or some process we cannot imagine, their technology remained. The towers stood silent, their purpose forgotten, their mechanisms dormant but intact. Indigenous peoples around the world preserved memories of what these structures had once done, encoding the knowledge in myth and legend and oral tradition. And then the modern era arrived. The first European explorers found the towers and did not understand them. The scientists of the Enlightenment studied them and drew conclusions they dared not publish. The industrialists of the 19th century realized what they had found and made a calculated decision. This technology could not be allowed to exist, not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. Free energy would have meant the end of empire, the end of colonialism, the end of the economic systems that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of the few. The towers had to be destroyed, not for technical reasons, but for political ones. They were incompatible with the world that the new masters of industry were determined to build. So the towers came down, the tunnels were sealed, the records were burned, and a new history was written, one in which electricity was a recent invention, in which progress meant dependence, in which scarcity was natural and inevitable. We have lived inside this lie for over a century. We have built our entire civilization on foundations of manufactured ignorance. And we have accepted, without question, limits that were imposed upon us by men who feared what we might become if we were truly free. But the lie is crumbling. Every photograph that surfaces from a forgotten archive, every witness who breaks their silence, every researcher who refuses to accept the official story, these are cracks in the wall that was built to contain us, fissures through which the light of truth is beginning to stream. The towers cannot be rebuilt. The knowledge of how they functioned was lost with the civilization that created them, and even Tesla, for all his genius, could only approximate what the ancients had achieved. But knowing that they existed, understanding that free energy was once a reality, changes everything. It means that the scarcity we live with is not natural, it is imposed. It means that the pollution choking our planet is not necessary. It is a choice. It means that the systems of control that dominate our world are not inevitable. They are maintained only through our ignorance of the alternatives. This is the true power of what we have uncovered. Not the technology itself, which may be beyond our ability to recreate, but the knowledge that another way is possible, that abundance is not a fantasy, that the future we were promised, the future of free energy and unlimited potential, was real once and could be real again. The men who destroyed the towers believed they were securing their power forever. They were wrong. They could destroy the machines, but they could not destroy the memory. They could burn the records, but they could not silence the earth itself, which still hums with the residual frequency of what once was. And they could not anticipate this moment, the moment when the scattered evidence would begin to coalesce, when the witnesses would find the courage to speak, when a generation raised on official lies would begin to ask the questions that had been forbidden for over a century. We are that generation. The towers are gone, but we remain. The system was destroyed, but the knowledge survives. And the frequency of remembrance, that low hum that persists in sacred places around the world, is growing stronger. Listen, can you hear it? It is the sound of a truth that refused to die. The echo of a civilization that built wonders we can barely imagine. The voice of the earth itself, calling us to remember what we were meant to become. The towers of Tartaria stood for millennia, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of nations. They powered a world without pollution, without scarcity, without the artificial limits that define our modern existence. And when they were destroyed, something essential was taken from us, a birthright we did not know we had lost. But inheritance works in strange ways. What is buried does not always remain buried. What is forgotten can be remembered, and what was taken can in time be reclaimed. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The evidence we have gathered is only the first layer of a truth that extends far deeper than we can yet imagine. There are more photographs to be found, more witnesses to be heard, more sites to be surveyed. The network of towers was vast, and its remnants are scattered across every continent on Earth. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding what was lost. Each revelation weakens the wall of silence that has contained this truth for over a century. And each person who hears this story and refuses to forget becomes a carrier of the frequency, a node in a new network of awareness that is slowly, inexorably replacing the one that was destroyed. The towers transmitted energy through the air itself, connecting distant points in a web of invisible power. We can do the same with truth. We can become the network that the destroyers feared, sharing what we know with everyone who is ready to hear it, until the lie can no longer sustain itself against the weight of accumulated evidence. This is our task. This is our purpose. Not to rebuild the towers, which may be beyond our current capabilities, but to rebuild the awareness that the towers represent. To remember that abundance is possible, that freedom is our birthright, that the scarcity we have been taught to accept as natural is, in fact, the greatest deception in human history. The frequency of forgetting has dominated for over a century, but frequencies can be changed, resonance can be shifted, and the silence that has covered this truth for so long is finally beginning to break. We are the witnesses now. We carry the memory forward. And in carrying it, we become part of something larger than ourselves, a movement of remembrance that stretches back to the builders of the original towers and forward to a future we can barely imagine. The towers of Tartaria are gone, but their legacy endures in everyone who refuses to forget, in every question that challenges the official story, in every moment of wonder when we look at the world around us and sense that something vast and beautiful has been hidden from our sight. This is the frequency of remembrance. It cannot be silenced, it cannot be destroyed, and it is growing stronger with every person who hears this truth and chooses to carry it forward. The photograph is still there. Black and white, a tower rising against the horizon, an image of what once was, and a promise of what could be again. Look at it closely. Remember what you have learned. And when the silence tries to settle back over your mind, when the weight of the official story presses down on your awareness, return to this image, return to this truth. The towers were real, the system was real, and the future it represented is still waiting for us to claim it. All we have to do is remember. If you have watched until this moment, it is because something in this story has resonated with you. Something in the frequency of these words has found an echo in your own awareness. You are not here by accident. You are here because you were meant to hear this truth. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end, so I can get to know you and know who really values the stories on this channel." Your presence here matters. Your witness matters. And your willingness to carry this truth forward is part of something larger than any of us can fully comprehend. If this story has moved you, if it has changed how you see the world around you, then share it with others who are ready to hear. Every person who learns this truth becomes a carrier of the frequency. Every share weakens the wall of silence that has contained this knowledge for over a century. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the moment. We are building something here, a community of seekers who refuse to accept the official story, who believe that truth deserves witnesses, who understand that remembrance itself is a form of resistance. Join us, subscribe, become part of the network that is replacing the one that was destroyed. The towers are gone, but we remain, and together we will ensure that what was taken from us is never forgotten again. Like this video if it has spoken to you. Share it with those who need to hear. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey of discovery. And remember, always remember, that the silence was never natural. We are learning to hear again.